Imagine a world where the key to survival wasn't gold, or silver, or land, but a salty white liquid dripping from goat cheese. In medieval times, people guarded this liquid like a royal treasure. It could preserve food long enough to survive brutal winters, heal wounds when doctors had no answers, and even influence wars, trade, and religion. Villagers whispered legends about its power. Kings imposed taxes on it, and those who mastered its secrets controlled more than just cheese. They controlled life itself. So why was goat cheese brine so unbelievably important? And how did a simple farm animal shape the destiny of medieval Europe? Stay with me, because the truth is far stranger and far more fascinating than you could ever imagine. In the quiet corners of medieval Europe, past crumbling stone walls and narrow dirt paths lined with wooden cottages, one of the most underestimated substances of the era worked silently to preserve life itself: goat cheese brine. While kings and knights gained glory in illuminated manuscripts and heroic tales, the real weight of survival of villages enduring winter, of families maintaining nourishment through famine, often lay in something as deceptively simple as salted liquid. In medieval markets, goat cheese was more than a meal. It was a durable form of dairy, transformed by brine into something that could resist the slow march of decay. To understand why brine was so crucial, one must first picture medieval goat herders, living far from bustling cities and royal courts. Goats were favored not because they were glamorous livestock, but precisely because they were resilient. They could graze on rugged hillsides where cattle would starve. They tolerated harsher climates. They provided milk consistently, even when pastures thinned. The milk they gave could not be wasted. Without the modern conveniences of refrigeration, the medieval world relied on methods that kept milk edible for months. Through a series of observations and experiments, some accidental, others meticulously passed down through generations, villagers discovered that curdling milk with rennet and immersing it in a salty solution produced a stable food source. Brine acted like a quiet guardian. The high salt content discouraged harmful bacteria, slowing the growth of mold and rot. Goat cheese hardened into wheels or balls, firm enough to stack in cool stone storage rooms. Families could trade it, travel with it, and depend on it. As seasons changed and fresh milk became scarce, brined cheese became the steady companion of harvest workers, sailors, soldiers, and pilgrims walking dusty roads to distant shrines. Without brine, these wheels of cheese would soften, spoil, and collapse under the warm European sun. With brine, they became wealth that could be saved for the future. Villagers developed personal preferences for brine mixtures. Some used sea salt, imported expensively from coasts many days' journey away, while others depended on rough minerals mined from inland salt deposits controlled by local lords. A village might guard its brine recipe like a prized secret. One might add herbs for flavor or wine for a richer texture, while another relied on simplicity. Water and salt alone, believing purity produced the best taste. The brining barrels themselves were almost ceremonial. Oak casks scrubbed clean, carefully sealed to prevent seepage, placed in cellars that remained cool and dark. Salt, however, was not cheap. Its value was so high in certain regions that it served as a form of currency. Traders hauled wagon loads of salt across Europe, escorted by guards to fend off thieves who understood that power and salt were often linked. To control the salt trade was to control brine and therefore food security. Feudal lords and monarchs imposed regulations, taxes, and trade restrictions over salt, which in turn shaped the availability of cheese. When salt supplies faltered, cheese did too. Even something as humble as a wheel of goat cheese became a symbol of status, particularly during harsh winters when bread crumbled away and vegetables vanished from storage. A chunk of brined goat cheese on a wooden table was evidence of foresight. Monasteries played a major role in refining cheesemaking techniques. Monks, with their disciplined routines and written records, preserved knowledge that ordinary villagers lacked the tools to document. They experimented with fermentation, aging, and brining times, experimenting with how long cheese should rest before being eaten or sold. It was in monastic halls that goat cheese began to evolve from a simple, survival food into a tradable good that appealed to wealthier households. Nobles took interest in cheese not only for its durability, but for its flavors. The salty tang of goat cheese complemented preserved meats and paired well with ale or wine. Soon, royal kitchens demanded that cheesemakers provide bricks and wheels of uniform shape and weight. What had once been a peasant's everyday food became a delicacy, celebrated at feasts and gifted between noble families. Still, goat cheese brine did not belong to the upper class alone. In the everyday rhythm of European life, cheese was a staple, especially in regions where cattle herds were too costly to maintain. Herders kept goats close to their wooden homes, letting them roam rocky fields. Every morning, the milk was collected and strained through cloth, then left to separate. Once curds formed, they were pressed into molds and submerged in brine. Women handled much of the cheese making. It was their knowledge, passed down from mothers and grandmothers, that ensured whole communities remained fed. The brining process became a chore and a tradition. Familiar as baking bread or tending fires, cheese brine influenced trade routes. Markets in Italy, Spain, and France saw merchants transporting barrels of cheese from small villages to cities. In return, brine brought prosperity back to rural settlements. The exchange strengthened cultural ties. A trader might carry stories from distant lands while collecting goat cheese from a shepherd's family. Slowly, variations of the product spread across the continent. Some regions produced softer cheeses to eat quickly. Others made sturdy wheels meant for long journeys. Travelers relied on these supplies during pilgrimages' long treks to holy sites such as Canterbury, Santiago de Compostela, or Rome, without brine cheese. Such expeditions would have demanded greater resources and risk. Goat cheese sustained body and spirit alike. In wartime, brine cheese played an even more strategic role. Armies marching across Europe needed food that wouldn't perish. Barrels of goat cheese accompanied troops alongside hard bread and dried meats. Commanders understood that hungry soldiers make poor fighters. Preserved cheese could make the difference between survival and defeat. When supplies dwindled, morale faltered, and campaigns failed. Conversely, well-fed forces carried on, emboldened by something as small as a bite of salted dairy. Behind every battle decision lay a network of supply chains, all dependent on careful preservation like brining. Brine's influence even touched religion. Fasting rules within the Christian church restricted the consumption of meat on many days of the year. Cheese, however, was often permitted. Goat cheese became a favored food during Lent and other holy periods, when diets depended on plant sources and dairy. Monasteries, again, were central to this religious consumption, producing huge quantities of brine cheese for sale or donation. Wealthy patrons sometimes endowed abbeys specifically to supply cheese to the poor. Charitable distributions of goat cheese became ritualized, reinforcing the idea that brine provided not only physical preservation, but spiritual nourishment as well. The structure of brine cheese lent itself to longevity. Cheese wheels stacked in storerooms acted almost like currency. Families saved them for emergencies, a sudden illness, a bad harvest, or a wedding feast requiring extra food. Barter systems were common throughout rural Europe. A villager might trade goat cheese for blacksmith services, cloth, or even part of a neighbor's farmland. In this way, brine may have shaped land ownership and social hierarchies. Those who could produce larger quantities of cheese gained economic leverage, enabling them to rise above subsistence living. A family enriched by cheese could pay taxes or make offerings that earned them favorable treatment by local lords. Yet, this reliance on brine also made food systems fragile. If salt shipments were delayed or blocked by political conflict, panic set in. Villagers rushed to conserve the little brine they had. Cheese production slowed. Children grew hungry. Salt scarcity taught communities that stability depended on trade relationships, diplomacy, and infrastructure beyond their control. Meanwhile, cities richer in resources had better access to preserved foods, increasing inequality. Goat cheese brine, therefore, was not only a culinary tool, it was a measure of privilege. Cheese-making knowledge continued to advance over centuries. Medieval households became experts at reading brine. They could sense when the salt balance was off, judging by touch or smell whether the mixture needed adjustment. Brine turned cloudy as it wore down, requiring replenishment. Cheesemakers learned to reuse brine for months, even years, believing older brine improved flavor. And in many cases, it did. Aged brine cultivated beneficial bacteria that deepened taste and hardened rind. In communities where experimentation was encouraged, cheese styles flourished. A visitor could pinpoint a region of Europe based solely on the cheese's saltiness, texture, or tang. Goat cheese brine seeped into culture in quieter ways too. Proverbs emerged about the strength of brined foods. Love and patience were compared to brine, necessary for something to last. Songs sung by dairy workers echoed the rhythm of daily tasks, milking goats, stirring curds, lifting heavy barrels. These were not tales of glamorous feats, but of survival, of honoring small skills that held civilization together. For all its worth, brine remained humble. No medieval chronicles praised brine makers or detailed their work. Kings had scribes, warriors had poets, but those who stirred salt into water rarely received recognition. Their anonymity reflects a broader truth. History often forgets those who keep societies running through quiet labor. A knight on horseback might protect a kingdom's borders, but without food, without something like brined goat cheese, the kingdom would starve from within. Every wheel of cheese symbolized hours of unseen care. Even beyond food preservation, brine had other uses. It disinfected wounds, cleaned tools, and deterred pests from invading storage rooms. Sailors on ships used brine to rinse decks and treat leather. Householders discovered that soaking certain vegetables in brine kept them edible longer. The technique broadened into pickling, extending culinary diversity. The more Europe relied on brine, the more indispensable salt became, shaping economic empires like the Venetian Republic, which controlled salt trade routes and grew wealthy from its monopoly. Salt taxation became an infamous method of royal income, driving unrest and rebellion in later centuries. This story of goat cheese brine is ultimately a story of resourcefulness. Medieval life demanded constant adaptation. People learned that nature could be transformed if one understood its rules. Milk curdles, salt preserves, time matures. A wheel of cheese represented balance between land and labor, necessity and curiosity, nature and invention. It could be the difference between famine and survival. That medieval families trusted brine so completely shows how deeply food security shaped daily life. Walking through a medieval village market, one might find tables stacked with cheeses of varying colors and firmness. Some wheels bore the imprint of woven cloth, others were smooth and shiny from a recent brine bath. Buyers squeezed the cheese gently, testing it like fruit. They inhaled its fresh, salty aroma. And in that simple exchange, a coin for a wheel, lay an unspoken awareness of what a miracle preservation truly was. Today, when cheese rests comfortably in well-lit supermarkets, it can be difficult to imagine how valuable a salted wheel once was. Refrigerators eliminate the fear of spoilage. Electricity ensures consistent temperature. Salt is cheap, common, available to all. But hundreds of years ago, brine was lifeline and currency and heritage. It turned milk, one of the most perishable substances, into something nearly immortal, though medieval scribes rarely wrote about such everyday practices. The continuity of cheese-making traditions tells its own story. These customs survived not because they were recorded in noble archives, but because families recognize their worth. The memory of how to mix brine, how long to age cheese, how to store it for months, these skills passed down through generations as naturally as breathing. It was this knowledge, persistent and practical, that nourished Europe's population through times of uncertainty in the end. Goat cheese brine stands as proof that some of the most influential forces in history are quiet ones. While wars raged and kingdoms rose and fell, brine continued to work silently in barrels across the continent. It preserved taste, health, and life. It kept children fed and armies strong. It supported trade networks and shaped economies. It symbolized resilience and ingenuity in a world where survival depended on the smallest details. If you were to travel back to a medieval kitchen, you might see a woman lifting a cheese wheel from a wooden mold, lowering it into brine with steady hands. She likely wouldn't call herself a historian, but in her daily work she's preserving more than food, she's preserving culture. The cheese will nourish her children for weeks or months. It might become a gift, a bargaining chip, or a meal shared with guests around a fire. And as that wheel of cheese soaks, it becomes part of a lineage that stretches far into the future. Brine was the invisible shield protecting those who depended on the land. It was never glorified, but its absence would have been catastrophic. In every bite of brined goat cheese consumed by peasants and nobles alike, there was a taste of survival. The salty tang, sharp and memorable, carried with it the story of an entire society. The medieval world was built on countless quiet practices like this. The night watchman keeping streets safe, the mason laying stones in a cathedral wall, the cheesemaker stirring brine in the dim light of dawn, all contributed equally to the endurance of their communities. Goat cheese brine did not win battles or write decrees. Yet without it, many of those battles and decrees would never have come to be. History is often told through grand narratives, but it is lived through small acts like preserving food with brine so that another day could be faced with strength. Perhaps that is why, even though goat cheese brine rarely appears in history books, its legacy survives in kitchens today. We still salt our food, store cheese as if preparing for a long winter, and celebrate fermented flavors developed over time. Modern cheeses still echo those early discoveries of medieval villagers who trusted brine to protect what mattered most. And so the story continues not loudly, but with the same quiet determination that sustained families centuries ago. Thank you for staying with me through this wonderfully strange journey into the past. It's amazing how even the most ordinary things, like goat cheese brine, can hold entire worlds of forgotten history. If you enjoyed relaxing with this story and it helped your eyes feel a little heavier, I'd love to have you here again. This is Quiet Boring Sleep, where we explore the calm, hidden corners of history together. If you'd like more peaceful adventures just like this, please give this video a like and gently press that subscribe button. It truly helps keep these sleepy stories coming. Wishing you soft dreams and a quiet night. Until next time, good night.